Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A warm welcome to the opening session of the Green Bank Design Summit. My name is Angela Whitney. I'm one of the organizers of the summit. I work for RMI and am co-director of the Green Bank Design platform. We are so happy you have joined us. You've come from 48 countries, from government, NGOs, private and public banks, and many other types of institutions. Your participation is what will make this a great event. Before turning to today's distinguished panelists and speakers, I will start by providing some logistical information about this session and the event overall. First, please note that this session and 3 other sessions during the week will be translated into Spanish. If you prefer to listen in Spanish, you can navigate to the globe at the bottom right of your screen and then click on it. You should then see an option to select Spanish. If you've done so, the content you hear should now be in Spanish. Second, most of all of the sessions will be recorded, so you can watch them at any time if you are unable to attend the live event. If you have questions or technical issues throughout the week, you can click on the orange question mark on the bottom left of the Social 27 screen. Someone is sitting by to answer your questions. You can also direct message anyone with a background like mine. We are all event organizers and here to help. The Social 27 platform, which you use to navigate to get to this session, has lots of features for connecting with speakers and attendees. So we encourage you to spend some time on the site. We hope you enjoy this week. There are amazing speakers, valuable content, opportunities to learn, share, and connect. With that, I would like to welcome our first 2 speakers, Brianne Marie Thomas, Chief Executive of the Green Finance Institute, who will give a welcome from the host. Then we will hear from Nigel Topping, high-level climate action champion for COP26, about what is needed in the run-up to this year's Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
On behalf of the Green Bank Design Platform and the organizing partners at the Green Finance Institute, Rocky Mountain Institute, and the Natural Resources Defense Council, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 2021 Green Bank Design Summit. In particular, I want to extend my warmest thanks to the many distinguished green banking experts and practitioners who will participate during the different summit sessions this week, including the speakers and panelists we have lined up today for this plenary session. I also want to express our great appreciation for our event sponsors and partners, the Inter-American Development Bank, Green Bank Network, and Green Climate Fund for their support in the development of this event. Today, we are at a crucial juncture. In response to the climate crisis, countries around the world are committing to greater and more ambitious climate action. These commitments will require trillions of dollars in new investments, and there is a pressing need to rapidly scale up and accelerate the flow of capital to finance low carbon, climate resilient, and sustainable solutions, particularly in emerging and developing economies. The urgency of this shared challenge is now even more apparent as countries strive to ensure a just and equitable recovery from the COVID pandemic. Green banks, as country or regionally specific specialized financing institutions, or sometimes dedicated facilities, can play a critical role in addressing the climate crisis and advancing a green recovery. These institutions and facilities can help countries meet their climate goals by catalyzing domestic and international investments and accelerating the flow of global climate finance to meet the aims of the Paris Agreement, to also reduce inequalities by spurring economic development through job creations, and also delivering other environmental co-benefits, such as improving air and water quality. Around the world, a growing number of countries are recognizing the benefits of the Green Bank model and are keen to develop their own. The Green Bank Design Platform was developed to help country and other stakeholders overcome the most frequent barriers to green bank establishment. The platform will help countries navigate the process of setting up green banks, facilitate access to technical expertise, provide peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and help generate and collate knowledge. This week's summit is an example of the growing green bank community of practice that the platform is helping foster. This is the second global convening of stakeholders that are vital to the establishment of green banks and other dedicated green finance institutions and facilities. So we are really excited to be hosting participants from Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America to exchange best practice, foster relationships, and develop strategies for success. Our objectives this week are to facilitate information exchange, build expertise amongst decision makers about how to design, implement, and operate green banks and similar entities. We want to build connections and broaden the community among our green bank stakeholders, especially in emerging markets. And we want to explore specific challenges that countries are facing relating to green bank formation and workshop the solutions to accelerate the establishment of green banks. And finally, we want to launch ongoing collaboration amongst this growing global community. To that end, the summit will be highly participatory, and the panels, workshops, and country clinics have all been specifically tailored for particular stakeholder groups. So please, we encourage you to actively participate in all your sessions, as well as in our Green Bank community by taking advantage of the networking tools this virtual conference platform offers. So today's plenary session will start us off by exploring the opportunities that green banks can help deliver, from enabling implementation of nationally determined contributions and sustainable development goals, to facilitating the flow of climate finance and supporting efforts to build a greener, more equitable post-COVID future. I thank you all for joining us, and I really look forward to a constructive and productive summit.
Thank you very much, Brianne Marie. It's a real pleasure to join you all today. I must say I'm very encouraged to see this type of solution and action-oriented event as we head towards this year's Conference of the Parties. COP26 is the COP where we really must make the shift from global negotiation to global action on the three pillars of the Paris Agreement: mitigation, resilience, and finance. And although finance may be the third pillar, it really is at the very heart of the challenges we face. We know that our success on mitigation and resilience depends in large measure on our ability to shift investments from polluting industries to low carbon solutions and from destructive land use practices to nature-based solutions. According to the World Bank, $4 trillion a year will be needed to invest in mitigation and resilience measures in developing and emerging economies. That's a massive challenge, particularly as the world strives to recover from the pandemic. But of course, it also creates an opportunity to rebuild with stronger, more resilient, and more equitable economies. Now, to really achieve these kind of transformational shifts, we need, of course, the developed countries to deliver in detail on the $100 billion commitment that they've, in international climate funds that they've made under the Paris Agreement and reiterated at the G7 recently. But we know that international public finance, although it will grow and needs to leverage more, will not be sufficient to bridge the investment gap that we face. So it's critical that we accelerate both north-south public climate flows and that these funds have the greatest possible impact by leveraging private capital, both international and domestic, to catalyze the kind of scale of additional investments that World Bank report talks about. Institutions that can organize and mobilize climate finance at the national level are therefore essential in spurring investments into these critical low carbon solutions. And I'd say that successfully delivering climate action is to a large extent driven by country level planning and investments, which requires strong national institutions. These institutions can ensure investments are being made into projects and sectors that are most critical for climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as responding to local contexts to ensure that they're robust for local economies. So I think that the case for locally driven green investment banks helping to quickly and efficiently channel international climate funds and mobilize private capital into local solutions that strengthen vulnerable communities and help reduce inequalities has been well made. Solutions like resilient climate infrastructure in cities, clean energy access, sustainable agriculture, and the development of new green sectors that can create jobs for younger generations. By fostering the financial innovation that will help accelerate the maturity of local green markets, green banks can support green recoveries that are aligned with the Paris Agreement and can even help raise further climate ambition. It's really exciting to see interest in the Green Investment Bank model coming from such a diverse array of countries and to see so many of those countries participating in this summit. I really look forward to hearing about the progress achieved this week, and I welcome emerging green banks to share your advances at COP26. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne Marie Thomas and Nigel Topping, for the encouraging words and for setting the tone for the 4 days ahead. Now, I would like to welcome Lord Nicholas Stern, Chair of the Center for Climate Change and Economics and Policy, to say a few words. He will be followed by remarks from Amelie Amen, Director of Climate Change with the CDC Group.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Brianne Marie, GFI, RMI, and RDC for bringing us all together. So we start with thinking about where we are. And where are we? We're at an absolutely crucial moment in history. We have the twin crises of COVID and climate, the latter still more severe than the former, tragic though the former has been. And that following a difficult decade for the world, which saw in many countries a decline in productivity growth, threats to social cohesion, deepening challenges to biodiversity, climate, and our environment in general. So the COVID broke over a difficult situation, which was associated with a badly handled, slow recovery from the global financial crisis of a decade or more ago. How do we recover? How do we drive forward in a different way? We have to do that through strong investment of the right kind and innovation of the right kind. The right kind is sustainable and green that allows us to develop strongly over the future decades. That's the challenge. We must not have the consumption boom of the roaring 20s a century ago, and we must not have premature austerity as we did a decade or so ago. We must not confuse financial responsibility with premature austerity. And that set of arguments, which some of us put in a report we prepared for the G7 summit, those arguments I think were accepted at the G7 summit. We have a world with a tremendous array of investment opportunities and plentiful savings. That's why we have such low interest rates. But the challenge is to draw investment opportunities into real investment programs and get the right kind of finance in the right place and the right scale at the right time. If we get it right, we launch a new era of development. If we get it wrong, we have a lost decade for development and a dire future for us all from the point of view of climate, biodiversity, and the environment. So what do development banks do to play their part in the process and to drive this new model of growth and a sustainable recovery? Well, the first thing is to bring through the investments from possibilities into real programs. That means policies, that means working with countries on the investment climate, the kind of environment where investment can take place with confidence and with reliable returns. The second thing that they do is to bring the right kind of finance, right place, right time, and that means taking the kind of risks which other players cannot so easily take. So that's their challenge, and they have to act fast and on scale. So we have to green the operations, all the operations of all the development banks. Indeed, actually all financial institutions, public and private. So this is something which is right across the board. It's not pushed up into a box or a cupboard in one particular place whilst everybody else gets on as they were before. And that's the special role in this context of green development banks, because they can chart the way and they can pioneer this whole system change that we need. So we should see the green investment banks as in the vanguard, but the vanguard of a whole system change, not some place where this particular issue is parked, leaving everybody else get on with it as before. So how do you actually make that happen? Well, I've been deeply involved in this story for about 30 years now. I was involved in resuscitating the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and reorienting the World Bank. And then that was 20 years ago. And in the last decade or so, I've been working on the creation of the new development bank, the BRICS Bank, the AIIB, the Green Investment Bank in the UK, and most recently deeply involved in the UK National Infrastructure Bank. So how do you actually make all this happen? Well, the first thing is to use the strengths of these institutions. They have the right kind of patient long-term capital through their shareholding and the strength of that financial base. They have the right kind of instruments all the way through from equity and guarantees through the right kind of long-term loans and mezzanine finance and so on. They have to use all those instruments. They have an array of skills. They have to build an array of skills around green sustainable investment. And of course, they bring confidence in the stability of policy. So those strengths should help shape the role they can play in being on the frontier, doing things that the private sector couldn't do alone, and driving that frontier forward, having big multipliers through examples, as well as big multipliers through sharing risk and partnering with the private sector. How do they actually do it? Well, I sat on the loan committee, the operations committee of the EBRD for 6 years, and every Friday morning, we applied the criteria carefully and rigorously of first, sound banking. You've got to have a sensible approach to risk and return because you've got to survive as a bank and set a good example. Additionality, go where the private sector cannot go on its own. And transition impact, what you do should have an example which takes people in a good direction. They can see what's possible. And the loan committees, the operations of the committees of the bank have to establish those principles, establish that culture in the context of a clear strategy of what that bank is trying to do in terms of the kinds of investments it will make and the kind of partners it will look for. So that is the way in which this thing can actually happen. Practically, it depends on recruiting the right staff. You've got to have people with financial sector experience, and it involves being led at the top by people who really know their business and can stand up and be counted against the pressures which will inevitably come upon them. So all this is possible, it's been done, but what we have to do now is to move faster than we ever moved before and on a scale which is bigger than we've ever moved before. So this is a moment for the development banks, the financial system as a whole, to take a lead in the interest of all the stakeholders and the future of us all. And green development banks can play a crucial role in the vanguard of this vital task of fostering the investment necessary, shifting the whole financial system, getting the right kind of finance, right place, right time, and shaping what must be a decisive decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation and also the opportunity for having engaged with the design of the Green Bank platform from its inception phase. I mean, this initiative could not be more timely. I think as we all acknowledge, we're really at a historic point in time now where countries really have an opportunity to be able to build that better and lay the foundations for a truly green, resilient and inclusive growth agenda, and to put in place those measures that will really help accelerate private investment in the medium and longer term. So we know that governments need to lead the way and prioritise green fiscal, public policy and finance measures that will incentivise the private sector. But we also know that governments can't do this on their own, and will need to form very strong relationships with the private sector and other stakeholders. And through public-private partnerships and engaging with business and civil society, there is now the opportunity to really ensure that all the public resource that is available, and recognising coming out of the pandemic that may be particularly scarce, but that is really used most effectively to really accelerate and drive those new businesses, those new opportunities, as well as meeting other social needs, to ensure this growth agenda really is a strong and sustainable one. Now, I've witnessed in many cases how international climate finance can have a very transformational impact. I would say, from my experience, that use of concessional and blended finance that is targeted to very specific barriers or to sharing very specific risks can be used very effectively, but really only when it is combined with technical assistance or expertise that is brought alongside to address both the policy and regulatory barriers, and to put in place the necessary incentives and help build out the capabilities of the financial sector and other key players in the economy. And all of these need to be within the national context, including recognising the political economy of the transformations that are going to be needed. And many of these examples, I think we've seen renewable energy come down in cost, and very much now more affordable and more commercial than the fossil fuel alternatives. But not all countries have benefited from those resources, and not all countries or all sectors are really on that path to decarbonisation. So essential to really step up now the use of international climate funding and combine that effectively with domestic public policy and public finance to really drive the transition. Access to international climate funding, however, can be quite complex. The architecture is fragmented, and particularly for smaller countries or for sectors that are more complex, such as agriculture and land use or transportation or industry, that also need to be decarbonised. There's a much less experience and track record in driving these transformations that are needed. So I do believe that a green bank model can be a pivotal actor within a national ecosystem, and would see there will be three main areas in which a green bank can help finance those green climate related investments that are going to be needed. First, very importantly, a green bank can be a vital bridge between government and policymakers and investors and businesses to help ensure that policy is designed effectively to help direct and attract private sector investments, and also provide confidence to the private sector on the direction of travel that government is heading towards. Secondly, a green bank can deploy technical assistance and blended finance in a very targeted way to overcome specific barriers. As I said earlier, this can be extremely effective and will need to be designed within the context of the local political economy, local capabilities, the local context of the financial sector. Whether this is for first of a kind investments in that economy, or for more mature economies for scaling up and attracting both domestic and international private capital. Another area is for financing businesses that can be that will be actually essential to helping manage some of the climate risks that economies are facing. These are often going to be small, medium-sized enterprises and will require very local solutions, local services to help manage climate risks in that context. So having a bank that has that expertise, that can engage and help support and work with those businesses, and of course finance those, will be an essential part of a country's transition. And lastly, I've talked quite a lot about financing green and the role of a green bank in helping to finance the transition. At the same time, we also know we need to green the financial sector and ensure that all financial actors ultimately are financing and consistent with those investments that are going to be part of the new economy. And a green bank can have a very important role in being a standard setter on green finance, helping to provide signals to others in the market and to help really build out a strong domestic green financial system. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Amelie Amen and Lord Stern. You both make it clear that more collaboration between public and private finance is needed in order to build back better and create a zero carbon and equitable economy, and that green banks are one way to do that. It is my pleasure now to introduce Doug Sims, Director of the Green Finance Center at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Doug will lead a fireside chat for the remainder of the session. If you have questions for the panelists, we encourage you to put them in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get to them at the end of the session. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Doug Sims from NRDC, and I'm here to transition the discussion from where we've been, which is a clear demonstration that national development banks, financial institutions have a pivotal role to play in COVID recovery by implementing sustainable and equitable low carbon development, or in other words, advancing development goals through fulfilling NDCs. Now we're going to pivot from macro to micro, from theory to practice, to talk to a representative of an innovative pure play green bank on the one hand, and a key source of international climate finance technical assistance on the other. In the first category, we'll chat with Manish Chauresia, Managing Director of Tata Clean Tech Capital, based in India. On the other hand, we'll talk to Moises Schwartz, Manager of the Institutions for Development Sector at the Inter-American Development Bank, or the IDB, a multilateral development bank that helps national development banks transform themselves into national green champions. Gentlemen, this is the fireside. Activate your cameras, please. This is a fireside chat, so we'll keep it informal, but also keep answers brief so we can get through quite a few topics. And to start, just say a few words, less than a minute, say 30 seconds, about yourself and your institution, and then I'll begin the questions. Manish, I'll start with you. I think you're on mute, Manish. I can't hear Manish.
I'm sorry.
Okay, there we go.
Audible now?
I hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Douglas. Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm Managing Director of Tata Clean Tech Capital Limited. Tata Clean Tech Capital Limited is the first private sector green investment bank in the world, Tata Group of India. And I've fund projects which are in the green space, like renewable energy, energy efficiency, water, and so on and so forth. That's a small introduction about us.
Thank you. Moises?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Doug. A pleasure to be here today and take part in this panel. I am Moises Schwartz. I'm the manager of the Institutions for Development Department at the IDB. The IDB, as you know, is a fundamental source of finance for Latin America and the Caribbean, but also of knowledge. My department places special attention to the role that institutions play in fostering development. We cover all sorts of public institutions and work hard to strengthen them. So more specifically to what brings us together this morning is the role we play in greening economies in the region through financing, knowledge, and finance schemes to mobilize resources. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to start out, and I should say that we'll have audience questions at the end, but if you have questions now, put them in the chat so we can have them in queue for when that part of the session begins. So we're going to start talking about COVID recovery. And so Manish, first to you, what are the biggest opportunities for Tata and other green-focused lenders to participate and support green COVID recovery?
So as far as Tatas are concerned, we are focusing on India. And today, India has a renewable energy capacity of about 80 gigawatts. Plus, we have some capacity in the solar rooftop space. So total capacity is about 85 gigawatts. Now, country is planning to significantly increase the investments in renewables. The aim is to go up to 450 gigawatts by 2030. Apart from that, today in India, the electrical vehicles are hardly about 1 million. The plan is to go up to 18 million electrical vehicles by 2030. Renewable energy investment, apart from in the renewable energy itself, will also need investment in the transmission infrastructure. Apart from that, there are very big plans to convert light into the LED lights and to also replace the conventional electric motors by energy efficient motors, and also significantly improve the efficiency of air conditioning. Our estimate is that all this will require an investment of about 1.5 trillion by 2030. Now, this has to be seen against the current GDP of the country, which is about 3 trillion. So we will require investment of close to 50% of the GDP in the next decade, in fact, in the next 9 years. So all this we believe will provide a very big opportunity for a green bank like us to participate in this growth. And while this is happening, we expect some new technologies to become commercialized. One is the technology for the storage of power. And we believe that as the technology develops, the cost of storage plus renewable energy, that will reach a point of disruption where this cost in combination will be lower than the cost of thermal power, which means that renewable energy would become a base load. And that disruption we feel will happen in the next 4 to 5 years. And that will be a point of inflection. I expect technologies like hydrogen to pick up. So clearly the opportunity in this space is immense. And we are very excited about this space. COVID is only going to give a new thrust to it because the government is putting a lot of thrust on growth, on capital expenditure. And a lot of it is going to come through green channels, naturally.
Thank you, Manish. I'm going to pivot to you, Moises, in terms of the IDB. As you said, you work closely with national development banks and other actors in Latin America. How are these institutions changing their approach to meet the twin challenges of climate change and COVID recovery?
Well, we work with an important number of development banks in the region. And specifically through these entities, we have been able to allocate resources to key activities to stimulate economic growth, access to credit, financial inclusion, SMEs, and even more so during the current pandemic, where so many firms have been affected. But besides their important role in supporting countries and businesses in the COVID crisis, NDBs have been instrumental in helping governments to green their economies. They have taken a leadership role based on their public development mandate to develop innovative financial solutions for low carbon and climate resilient investments. We believe there is a large potential to make the COVID-19 recovery climate smart by mobilizing and redirecting private capital towards low carbon and climate resilient activities. Policymakers need to incentivize investments with high socioeconomic, environmental, and climate multipliers to boost growth, create jobs, reduce poverty, and stimulate productive investment. And NDBs have a role to play in this regard by addressing both short and long-term needs, setting market signals, and taking those risks that the private sector is not willing or capable of undertaking.
Thank you, Moises. Back to you, Manish. So Tata is been able to mobilize international climate capital and bring it into India for innovative investment. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been able to source in terms of international climate capital for what sectors, and how do you blend that international capital with your capital raised in the local markets?
Yeah, so Doug, we are a private sector green investment bank, and we are pretty much for profit. So the cost of capital is extremely important for us. And we try to manage it very judiciously, both from the domestic sources and from the international sources. So first I'll talk about the international sources. So we consciously try to reach out to the climate investors globally. And we reached out to institutions like Green Climate Fund, to developmental financial institutions like JICA, CDC, FMO. And from all these institutions, we have raised a long-term capital, which is meant for certain specific end use. Like from Green Climate Fund, we have raised capital which is meant only for the solar rooftop. And that's a 20-year facility to be deployed over the next 4 to 5 years. Similarly, from JICA, we have raised money which is for renewable energy and for electrical vehicles. From CDC also, we have raised money which is for energy efficiency and electrical vehicles. So we have tapped various sources of financing from development financial institutions, from multilateral banks. But at the same time, for us, even the domestic sources are extremely important because based on the macroeconomic situation, sometimes the domestic capital is cheaper for us and sometimes the foreign capital is cheaper for us. So we essentially blend these two. The challenge we have in using international capital is that most of our revenues, in fact, all our revenues are in the domestic currency, while the international capital comes in a foreign currency, which has to be hedged into the Indian rupees. Hedge market in India is not very deep, because of which sometimes those hedges are expensive. So we have to be very judicious in our selection. But as I told you that we have reached out to a lot of climate investors, and we have successfully tapped funds for specific sectors. And with each passing year, we are only deepening this relationship.
Thank you, Manish. Staying on this theme of specialized green funds or institutions being critical actors in the green transformation, Moises, how can specialized green funds, like the kind that IDB has supported for energy efficiency, be more effective than business as usual in crowding in private capital in the IDB's experience?
Well, we believe that specialized financial instruments to be effective in the energy sector must have 4 important elements. Number 1 would be innovation. The instrument must demonstrate the ability to address directly or indirectly barriers to private climate finance that have not yet been addressed or will be addressed more effectively compared to other instruments in the market. Number 2, I would say actionability. The instrument needs to identify the key implementing entities, the pathway to implementation, including timeframe, activities, milestones, and possible challenges. Number 3 would be catalytic potential. The instrument should be scalable and replicable, It should mobilize private climate capital within a sizable market, be scaled or replicated, and achieve socioeconomic development and environmental impacts. And number 4 would be financial sustainability. The instrument must have a commercial viability. It should have a strategy to phase out financial support and achieve market viability. And this strategy that I just mentioned has been used in energy efficiency as well as in the electric vehicle sector. In both cases, the IDB developed the instruments, engaging key market players to deploy the instruments and guarantee its financial sustainability. For energy efficiency, the instrument provided insurance, allowing SMEs to manage and isolate risks. For the electric vehicle sector, our program provided access to long-term concessional loans to ease the impact of the higher capital expenditures on overall project return profile, thus ensuring a better match between project cash flows and repayments. So these are simply ideas, but I guess we can deep a little bit more in this, and that would be an avenue for the future.
Thanks, Moises. I want to touch on something which was raised by Manish, which was raised by Lord Stern and Brianne in their comments about the role of green banks in working with the government. You said also that Tata is a private sector green bank, first of its kind in the world, but I understand that you also are able to influence and advise on government policy. How does your expertise and your role as a green bank help you advise the government, and how do you advise the government on what kinds of issues?
So, Doug, over the last 6 years, we have funded about 250 projects. And in the process, we have developed strong relationship with various project sponsors and various project players. Essentially, we interact with them and we partner with them in the project implementation. So we come to know about the day-to-day problems they face. Sometimes these problems are project specific, sometimes they are policy specific, and sometimes they are just about some irritants in the system. So we use our relationship with the government to appraise the relevant leaders in the government about the issues which are present on the ground. And in fact, these meetings are held every month. And it does help in the government in modifying the policy or solving out the teething problems. So that is one way out. The other is that for certain emerging sectors, like say hydrogen, electrical vehicles, we are in touch with a lot of multilateral banks, development financial institutions, and other players like you all. So we do come to know about the way policy is being formulated globally and what is happening globally. So we advise government on various things to be done so that the sector can grow seamlessly. Other is that sometimes we have done advisory, paid advisory for the government. Like we have been involved in carbon footprinting for a few cities about a few years back. So these are some of the ways in which we have tried to influence the policy, and we have to try to play a proactive role in the development of the sector.
Thank you, Manish. We're going to do a quick final round, and then we're going to pivot to audience, a few audience questions. Moises, the IDB has been pioneering a platform for green bonds in Latin America to help NDB issue in the capital markets to get green financing. We heard a lot earlier about how we need to both create green banks and also green the financial sector. How is your green bond program helping NDBs green themselves, become more green? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Well, NDBs can certainly leverage and direct institutional investors' assets into infrastructure investment by issuing green and sustainable bonds in local and international capital markets. Also, NDBs can start structuring mechanisms of de-risking through innovative finance. Implementing a green bond program is definitely a robust path to become a green NDB and support development and the achievement of the SDGs and Paris Agreement goals. Also, I would say the investment areas of a green bond program relate directly to the development agenda and has a growing potential. For example, the need to optimize energy use, avoid fossil fuels, and shift to zero carbon technology on power generation. Transportation is another crucial path for development, for example, to expand the electric vehicle market and infrastructure. Another low carbon opportunity is certainly green hydrogen. So green and sustainability bonds are becoming effective capital market instruments that prioritize sustainability and crowding private investments. If we consider the Latin America market, for example, although the regional green and sustainability bond market has been steadily growing in the past 6 years, it only represents 2% of the $1 trillion global thematic bond market. And given the large infrastructure investment gap and the need for a green recovery in the region, there is a great opportunity to further boost this market.
Thanks, Moises. So lightning round. I'm going to stay with you, Moises, and I'm going to Manish for a final question from me, and then we're going to turn to the chat. So you heard about the G7 commitments that were reiterated at the G7 conference from the G7 countries. If you had one climate finance wish that could be granted by the G7 leaders that have promised additional action on climate finance that would help you be more effective in your mission, what would that climate finance wish be? And same question to Manish after you're done.
Sure. Well, if we were to wish so many things we would wish for, but one wish it would be basically to make more grant finance available. The share of grants in climate finance has decreased and is now a small share of overall public finance. Grant finance represents a critical lever to mobilize private capital. Grant resources are required to enable MDBs and other multilateral financing entities to the risk investments in developing countries. The private sector would otherwise avoid and further scale up efforts on blended finance. The use of grants in blended finance is also an important tool to develop more innovative de-risking mechanisms. Additionally, in order to mobilize private capital at scale, ADB experience shows that concessional loans often need technical cooperation grants to support pipeline building, which is precisely what we just heard from our previous speaker. Hence, more grant finance is certainly a huge necessity.
Thank you, Moises. Manish, your climate finance wish.
Yeah, so I have gone through the G7 communique, and it's very exhaustive in terms of various aspects like disclosure related to financial disclosures related to climate, carbon pricing and trading, flow of funds. But actually, if you go through it, you understand that it lacks the required details. And if they come out with a little more details, if they're a little more concrete, then it can give very good signals to the private sector players like us. So my wish is that a more concrete detailing is done about the communique so that we get better market signals.
Excuse me. We're going to switch to the audience questions. First one, I'm just going to make an announcement. There's some questions about what the panelists' thoughts are on the U.S. Federal Green Bank accelerator legislation for a federal U.S. Green Bank that's been proposed by President Biden and others. So in this particular case, this panel probably is not best situated to answer that question, but we do have a session dedicated to that question tomorrow. Called Sparking America's Global Economic and Climate Leadership with the National Green Bank. And we'll have actually Senator Van Hollen, who's sponsoring this legislation tomorrow at 13 o'clock UTC. So please look for that. So I'm going to go to the next question. This is to Moises. Moises, what are the main NDBs in LATAM that IDB is supporting and helping their governments to green their economies? What programs could you mention, and where could we find more information about that?
Well, this is an extremely interesting question, and we have a lot of experience in doing this precisely. And this is basically what we do on a daily basis. So I could refer the audience to the IDB webpage. So there is a lot of information on the different projects that we have undertaken. Specifically on what we do with national development banks, I would say that close to 85% of the operations that we deal with medium and small size enterprises take place through these intermediaries. So in one of the responses I provided, I think it was your first question, so we use NDBs in order to allocate credit to specific areas, to stimulate specific economic activities. Now, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, so small and medium-sized enterprises have been severely affected. So there is a way through these national intermediaries, these national development banks, to allocate credit to them. Now, given their mandate to be a development agency, so there is a way for us to engage them in the relevance of greening their economies. So governments in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, have taken this seriously, but now they are overwhelmed with the pandemic. So the idea is to really try to strike the right balance and do a positive recovery in economic activity. And we are providing funds through these intermediaries, but at the same time, giving the incentives that would allow this channeling of resources for a green recovery. So this is an important challenge that we are facing, and we have seen a lot of receptivity from the region and from national development banks to greener their agendas. So we provide incentives, and as we have discussed this morning, basically we try to fill a vacuum here, helping these development banks to undertake some risks that the private sector is not willing to undertake. But by doing so, with the emphasis on greening the economy. So it's a combination that we are trying to implement in the region, and I guess we have had interesting results.
Thank you, Moises. Manish, turning to you, I'm gonna combine a couple of questions about what you are financing and what you think are opportunities. So, and that's also one of this could be also from Moises, but we'll start with Manish. So, in terms of looking at Scope 3 emissions from the supply chain that are difficult thus far to actually address, and particularly the questioner mentions the maritime sector. Is there do you have a vision on how Tata could help address both the visibility and the solutions required to reduce emissions in supply chains, while supporting global recovery and prosperity? And also, Manish, thinking about what you finance, can you talk about some of the projects that you financed that are on the larger side, to give a flavor of what your portfolio looks like? So the question is, how do we address Scope 3 and supply chain? And then in that context, also talk about a little bit about your larger project that you financed. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very pertinent question. See, supply chain can be addressed in a couple of ways. First is, a lot of the supply chain actually uses for transportation. Currently, the fossil fuel run vehicles. So to some extent, when it comes to the light transport, that can be electrified, and which is where Tatas can play a role. On the financing side, we are looking at the retail clean tech finance, and we are doing that with support from some from multilateral banks, because these sectors are developing where the capital costs are high, but then running costs are low. So total cost of ownership sometimes works out, provided the funding is at the right cost. But at the same time, these are new sectors. So we are also in the process of understanding it. And being private sector, as I told you, we are profit driven. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to collaborate with some multilateral institutions for them to provide a first loss guarantee. And at the same time, we are also collaborating with some operators and some manufacturers, whereby they are also helping us in providing some kind of a first loss guarantee. So along with collaboration from the manufacturers and from the multilateral development institutions, we are devising a product through which we can come out with a retail clean tech product, especially in the electrical vehicles and in the solar rooftop space. So that is the one idea which we are exploring on. The other thing which we are doing is looking at the supply chain for the renewable energy itself. So today, actually, in India, we do not have the supply chain for the manufacturing of solar panels, for the inverters, and for so many other equipments which are required in the renewable energy plant. So we are trying to help some of those players in the ecosystem who have the capacity to come out with these manufacturing units to manufacture the solar cells, solar panels. So that's another thing which we are doing. The third area which potentially can be done is to see how the heavy duty vehicles can be decarbonized. I'm talking about sectors like shipping, aeroplanes, heavy duty trucks. Now for that, we'll have to really work on the technology. And the technology which is emerging is the green hydrogen. So in this space, again, we are trying to talk to a lot of players. We are also trying to influence the policies of the government so that they come out with a green hydrogen policy. And this can eventually be commercialized, the way the wind and solar power has got commercialized over the last 7-8 years. So these are some of the things we are doing. And finally, one other area which has a very strong potential is basically the retail distribution of electricity. So there, in electricity, a lot of digitization is now happening, especially the equipments like smart meters, which can not only measure electricity consumption quite effectively, but also give a lot of feedback to the consumers as to how they can cut the electricity cost. That is where
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're actually running out of time. We have to close the session.
I can talk to this
I know this is great. So
yeah.
Okay. So we're going to start wrapping it up. I'm going to ask quickly, going to just pivot to Moises for like a 30-second answer to this last question from the audience, which is how can green banks help the IDB and other MDBs meet their mobilization goals, the disbursement and mobilization goals?
Well, this is the main challenge we face. And even though we are, I would say, the primary financing entity for Latin America and the Caribbean, whatever we do is not enough. So the big challenge is how to mobilize resources in the region. We have done some exercises, and from what we have financed in the region, we would say that for each dollar that the IDB contributes to the region, we have been able to mobilize resources for $1.3. So we are kind of generating a multiplying effect through all these concessional lending, blended finance, guarantee schemes, and so on and so forth. So this is the main challenge, and we know that the region faces huge needs. And as it was mentioned by our previous speakers, the billions of dollars that we require for climate change mitigation and sustainability in the future. So those are huge, huge challenges. So the idea is to be innovative, just to finish, and to make sure that we have the right mix between guarantees, concessional lending, all these hedging mechanisms. So we have to be innovative in order to try to attract private capital and do their part.
Thank you, Moises. This has been a great panel. I'm going to hand it back to Angela to wrap this up.
Thank you, Doug, Manish, and Moises. Very interesting discussion, and I think a great taste of the conversations we will hear over the next few days. I want to thank all of our esteemed speakers again. You set the stage for a great summit, and thank you to our sponsors and organizers. We encourage you again to spend some time on the Social 27 platforms to learn more about our sponsors and the speakers. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for 3 wonderful sessions and on the following days. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.